You know what's strange about Earth? It remembers. It holds secrets beneath its skin. Secrets that press and whisper, heavy as thunder waiting in the clouds. My name is Kaska. I am a dog of Cahokia, the great city of mounds and rivers, where thousands once lived, prayed, and built their world toward the sky. I ran through its plazas, chased children in the dust, and lay beneath the shade of towering wooden temples. I watched my people raise mounds so high they touched the clouds. But I also smelled something else inside those hills. Not just soil, not just clay, something darker. Fear, blood, silence. The humans said the mounds were resting places for chiefs and priests, ladders to the gods. But I knew better. I was there when hands trembled, when eyes looked away, when baskets carried more than earth. What I'm about to tell you will change how you see history, because sometimes monuments don't rise to honor life. Sometimes they rise to bury secrets. If silence held, Cahokia would remain a city of glory and memory. But if truth surfaced, the mounds would reveal not just greatness, but the weight of sacrifice, the cost of ambition, and the lives swallowed whole by power. Cahokia in my youth was alive. The air smelled of maize roasting over fires, of fish pulled fresh from the river, of smoke rising from countless hearths. I darted between traders from far-off lands, their arms heavy with shells and copper, their voices strange but excited. At dawn, the drums called thousands to the plaza. They lifted their eyes to the sun, chanting, hands raised in rhythm with the chief's voices. Children laughed and tumbled, chasing me across the packed earth, their joy echoing against wooden palisades. My master, Tahu, was a builder. Strong hands, steady back, hauling soil basket after basket up the slopes of new mounds. I padded beside him every day, my paws sinking in the dirt trails. From the top, the world stretched wide, forests thick with deer, rivers gleaming, fields bending with crops. To humans, it looked like glory. To me, it smelled of sweat and strain, of lives being poured into hills that grew taller than dreams. At night, as the fire crackled low, Tahu would speak to his son. These mounds are ladders to the sky, he said. They carry our prayers upward. His voice was proud, but sometimes when he thought no one listened, it faltered, and they cover what must never be spoken. I began to notice what others missed, the fierce scent of mothers whose children never returned from ceremonies, the solemn faces of men climbing with bundles wrapped too tightly, the sharp tang of blood buried in soil where no battle had been fought. One evening I followed Tahu when the moon was high. He carried a basket, not of earth, of bones, small, delicate bones. His hands shook as he lowered them into a pit within the mound. I whined, but he whispered, "Forgive me." This is for the city. The people cheered at the rising mounds, believing they honored chiefs and carried spirits to the gods. And yes, they did. But beneath the honored lay others, captives, servants, sometimes even children, buried not for remembrance, buried for silence. The drums grew harsher, the ceremonies longer. Crops began to fail. The river swelled and broke its banks. The leaders told the people, more gifts, more prayers, more lives must go into the mounds. And they obeyed. I watched families lower their eyes. I watched men turn away so they would not see, and I smelled it all, the bitter copper of fear, the salt of grief hidden behind clenched jaws. I was only a dog, but I understood. Humans speak in words, but their bodies shout louder. Their silences scream. Their fear has weight, and in Cahokia, silence was heavier every season. Children no longer laughed as freely. Women no longer sang while grinding maize. Men no longer joked by the fire. The city grew in size but shrank in spirit. I could smell the truth seeping from its foundations. The mounds were not only monuments, they were prisons for secrets, layered higher with every basket of soil. One morning, the plaza filled with more people than I had ever seen. Traders had come from far lands bringing stories of famine, of villages washed away by flood. The chief spoke to the crowd, their words rising above the drums. The gods demand more, they said. More offerings, more sacrifices, more devotion, or the river will take everything from us. The people murmured, but they obeyed. That night, fires burned bright on the mounds, and the air stank of blood. My ears rang with cries, sharp and short, swallowed quickly by silence. I crouched low in the shadows, tail between my legs, knowing that once again the city had fed its fear to the earth. Tahu returned home late, his face pale, his body stiff. He would not look at his wife. He sat by the fire, staring into nothing, his hands still trembling from what they had held. His son asked, "Father, why do the gods always want more?" Tahu could not answer. He only said, "Because we are small and they are great." But I smelled the lie on his breath. He was not afraid of gods. He was afraid of men, afraid of chiefs and priests who demanded silence as much as sacrifice, afraid of what might happen if he refused. The seasons turned, but the silence deepened. I watched mothers clutch their children tighter whenever drums sounded. I watched men drink heavily before ceremonies. I watched fields wither and river waters rise. And I listened to the city breathe, slower and heavier each day, as if it too carried a burden too great to bear. I lay by the hearth each night, staring at the flames, knowing that something was coming. Something that would test not just the strength of the people, but the truth they had buried beneath their feet. The silence thickened year by year. Laughter faded from the courtyards. Mothers clutched children closer, their eyes darting at the sound of drums. Men whispered doubts to themselves, never daring to voice them aloud. And still the mounds rose higher, each layer of soil pressing down on the city like the weight of the sky itself. I could smell the exhaustion in the air, the bitterness of fear so old it no longer smelled sharp but stale, like damp wood left too long in the rain. Even I, with my fading sight and stiffening legs, knew something was unraveling. One evening, when the sun bled red into the horizon and the air turned heavy, the plaza filled with shouting. The river had flooded again, tearing away crops and drowning homes. The people pleaded with the leaders for relief, for answers, for hope. But the chiefs stood tall atop the mounds, their painted faces solemn, their voices booming. "The gods are displeased," they said. "We must give more. More gifts, more prayers, more lives," I barked once, sharp and loud, as if to call out the lie, but the drums drowned me out. The crowd bent their heads, the city bent under silence again. That night I followed Tahu to the great mound. Torches flickered like fireflies, shadows long against the packed earth. The air smelled of sweat and smoke, of fear and finality. I crept close, paused silent in the dust, and saw what he carried. Not soil, not stones, a child wrapped in cloth. His own eyes were wide with horror, but his body moved like one trapped by chains he could not break. When he laid the small body in the earth, his shoulders trembled. He whispered, "Forgive me." My growl broke the night, low and steady. He turned, startled, but when he saw me, his face crumpled. He knelt beside me, pressing his forehead against mine, and I smelled his tears. "I cannot stop this," he murmured, "but I will remember." The weeks after blurred into a haze of rituals and fear. The city's rhythm faltered. Crops shriveled. Hunters returned empty-handed. Families whispered of leaving, of finding new lands where the gods did not demand so much. The leaders grew harsher, their ceremonies louder, their commands more desperate. They were not speaking to gods anymore. They were speaking to fear itself, and fear was never satisfied. Then came the day the sky turned strange. The sun was dimmed, swallowed by shadow, and the air went cold, though it was high summer. People screamed, some falling to their knees, others running in panic. The chiefs pointed to the heavens, declaring it a sign of wrath. "More!" they cried. "The gods demand more!" But something shifted that day. The silence of fear was joined by the silence of doubt. People began to look at each other differently, not just downward in submission. They began to wonder if the voices on the mounds were not gods at all, but men desperate to hold power. At night, storms came. Rain lashed the wooden palisades. The river rose furious, breaking its banks and swallowing fields whole. Families fled in the darkness, carrying only what they could hold, children on their backs, food in their hands. I barked at the chaos, circling Tahu's house as he gathered his wife and son. He looked at me, his face carved with weariness and resolve. "We cannot stay," he said. "This city is built on bones. The gods do not hear us. We must leave before it buries us too." He looked into my eyes, and though I was only a dog, I understood. "Kaska," he whispered, "remember this. One day they will come and call these mounds wonders. But you and I, we know what lies beneath." We left that night. The air smelled of ash and rain, of fear and freedom mingling. Behind us, drums still pounded, though fewer now, weaker, hollow. Ahead of us stretched the river, black in the starlight, and beyond it the forest that promised both danger and hope. I followed close to Tahu's heels, my paws splashing in the mud, my ears filled with the sound of silence that was no longer submission but escape. Centuries passed. Grass grew over the plazas, trees crowned the mounds, the fires went out, and the drums fell silent. The city emptied, swallowed by time, but the earth remembered. Beneath its skin lay bones and secrets, layered in silence. Humans forgot, but I did not. I am a dog, and dogs remember through scents, through sounds, through the weight of silence. Now they come as visitors, strangers with pale faces and strange tongues. They marvel at the mounds, measuring their heights, writing their stories, calling Cahokia a mystery, a wonder of ancient America. They speak of chiefs and ceremonies, of power and glory. They do not smell what I smelled. They do not hear what I heard. They do not feel the silence pressing up from the ground beneath their feet. I have learned something in my long memory. Empires rise with drums and fall with silence, and the earth always remembers. The mounds of Cahokia do not just hold the honored dead. They hold ambition, fear, sacrifice, and the silence of secrets too heavy for words. When you stand before them and feel the wind press against your skin, know this: you are not standing only on graves. You are standing on silence. And silence always speaks, if you are willing to listen. Because history is not only written in stones or songs, it is written in what was hidden, what was silenced, what was buried deep in the soil. Blood may sink, but truth always rises. And I, a dog who walked those streets, remember everything. I remember the laughter that turned to whispers, the songs that turned to silence, the prayers that turned to cries. I remember the hands that built ladders to the sky, and the hands that buried what they could not face. Sometimes when the night wind blows across the empty mounds, I can still hear echoes. The voices of children playing, the calls of traders in the plaza, the solemn chants of ceremonies long past. But beneath those sounds is another note, deeper, truer. The sound of silence that was chosen, enforced, endured. And the lesson it leaves is clear. Families, cities, empires, they do not fall because they are weak. They fall because they silence themselves, burying truth under soil and fear until nothing can grow. So remember this when you hear of great civilizations and their monuments. Remember that earth remembers, that every stone, every mound, every silence has a story, and that sometimes the greatest truths are not carved in monuments but buried beneath them, waiting for someone to listen. I was there, a dog among thousands, a witness with no voice but endless memory. And I tell you now, the mounds hide more than graves. They hide silence, and silence in the end is what destroys us all.